A country runs out of money.
It goes to the IMF for a loan. The IMF says yes. Here are the conditions. Cut government spending. Privatize state assets. Remove trade barriers. Devalue your currency. Raise interest rates. The country agrees. It has no choice. The loan arrives. And then the country gets poorer. This is not a theory. This is the documented outcome of IMF structural adjustment programs across 4 decades and dozens of countries. This is Cipher finance, and today we follow the loan. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, was created at Bretton Woods in 1944. Its stated mission is to promote global monetary cooperation, ensure financial stability, and reduce poverty. The stated mission and the documented outcomes are 2 different things. Beginning in the 1980s, the IMF began attaching conditions to its loans. These were called Structural Adjustment Programs, SAPs. The conditions were standardized. Every country received essentially the same prescription, regardless of its specific economic situation. Cut public spending, privatize, liberalize trade, open to foreign capital, reduce deficits. Mexico was the first country to implement structural adjustment in 1982. Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia followed through the 1980s and 1990s. To this day, economists can point to few, if any, examples of substantial economic growth among developing countries under SAPs. The documented outcomes tell a consistent story. In Zimbabwe, SAPs led to increased poverty, decreased economic stability, and negative environmental consequences. In Haiti, a country with an extensive IMF borrowing history, standardized neoliberal prescriptions ignored the country's specific political, economic, and environmental realities, leading to decreased access to healthcare and worsening economic instability. In Argentina, IMF programs imposed quickly and without regard for the country's social realities produced poor economic, social, and health outcomes. A peer-reviewed study published in 2026 using data from 1980 to 2019 across 168 countries found that IMF program participation leads to large increases, between 4.2% and 5% of the total population in the proportion of people living under the international poverty line. Not decreases, increases. The IMF's own Enhanced Structural Adjustment Facility acknowledged in its internal review that programs failed to meet their own objectives. They did not generate growth. They did not restore external viability. The IMF's own documents said this. Ask yourself, if a doctor prescribed the same medication to every patient, regardless of their diagnosis, and that medication consistently made patients sicker, what would we call that doctor? Now here is what the mainstream narrative leaves out. The IMF's voting structure is weighted by financial contribution. The United States holds the largest share, approximately 17% of voting power, giving it an effective veto over major decisions. The top 5 shareholders, the US, Japan, Germany, France, and the UK, collectively control the majority of votes. The countries most affected by IMF programs in Africa, Latin America, South Asia hold a fraction of the voting power. The people making the decisions do not live with the consequences. The people living with the consequences do not make the decisions. In Kenya, in 2024, youth-led protests against IMF-backed austerity measures turned violent. At least 39 people were killed, hundreds were injured, 627 were arrested. The IMF program continued. In Argentina, waves of protesters have repeatedly challenged IMF-backed budget cuts. The IMF program continued. Thomas Sankara, president of Burkina Faso until his assassination in 1987, understood what the loans represented. He said, "Imperialism often occurs in more subtle forms: a loan, food aid, blackmail. The debt trap works like this. A country borrows to stabilize. The conditions attached to the loan weaken its domestic economy. Weakened economies generate less tax revenue. Less revenue means more borrowing. More borrowing means more conditions. The cycle continues. Very few of these loans have ever been fully repaid. The IMF calls this help. The countries that received it call it something else. Share this before it gets buried. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented history. This is Cipher Finance. Now you know."